Hello everyone, I hope you're all keeping well, healthy and happy. I thought in this video I would talk about the fact that we are living in an occultocracy, not in a democracy as many people believe. To understand why, we need to take a look at politics. Because obviously, in any given democracy, you're going to have political parties which have political views, right? And they are constantly and almost always framed in the left-right paradigm, right? It's a false dichotomy, but nonetheless, you have this notion of the left versus the right, okay? Here's the really interesting part about that in today's world. And in fact, it might have been the case beforehand as well. That because the pendulum has shifted so far to the left, any party that is considered to be a right-wing party today is actually on the left, right? This is known as the Overton window. And so therefore you find frequently that most of the parties who call themselves conservative parties are in point of fact socialist. They are leftist. They are not on the right. But people, because they have an allegiance to the concept of conservatism, they still vote for these parties thinking that they represent conservative values. Okay? So basically, all parties that exist today are socialist parties. But why do I say it's an occultocracy? Well, because if you understand the origins of socialism, then you become very, very familiar with what socialism actually is and what it represents. Now, most people do not know about socialism or communism or their origins in real terms. For example, there are such people who believe that socialism began with Karl Marx. This is not true. It's not remotely true. And for many, many people, it's very easy for them to get fooled into this thinking because the left has pinned all its sins on Marx. Right? A very, very clever sort of tactic. It's the same thing that they did with Trotsky, by the way. Right? The notion that one man was responsible for it all. And they did the same thing with Stalin once his crimes were uncovered. It was like, oh, well, it was all Stalin. The communists after that were perfectly fine, of course, right? Which is not true, which we know from the Gulag Archipelago, which was written by Alexander Solzhenitsyn about his time in the gulags. But let's get to the heart of what socialism actually is and where it began, because it began in France during the revolutionary period. It followed on from Robespierre, essentially, but we'll get to that. So it could be argued that socialism began in 1838, with the creation of what was called the People's Charter. And it was an offshoot of Chartism. And Chartism was calling for more equitable distribution of income and better living conditions for the working classes. However, a gentleman by the name of Francois-Marie Charles Fourier took these ideas and formed what would later become utopian socialism, or socialism proper as we understand it today. Fourier's views and proposals inspired countless international utopian communities, and this includes the community of Utopia in Ohio in what is present-day America. Also in America was the La Reunion in Dallas in Texas, and you also had the North American Phalanx in Red Bank in New Jersey. And there was the Brook Farm in West Roxbury in Massachusetts, which was founded by a gentleman called Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, I don't have the time to go into Nathaniel Hawthorne himself, but if you want to check out who this gentleman was and the level of influence he had on subsequent socialist movements, you should be able to do that. Now, according to the book The Occult in Russian and Soviet Culture, written by Bernice Rosenthal, Charles Fourier embedded occult elements into his cosmology, right? For example, in his written work, The Law of Passionate Attraction, you can find several occult elements, and many more, in fact, in there that he presents. And according to James Webb, who wrote Occult Underground, socialists and occultists can be found running in harness. That's a direct quote from that book. Now, Fourier was also a Martinist, and if anybody's familiar with what Martinists actually are and what they believe and how they infiltrated the Roman Catholic Church and basically furthered the socialist agenda out of that, I think you'd be very interested in knowing that. But anyway, let's get back to Fourier for a second here. So Fourier was the first person to categorize poverty and not in inequality as the principal cause of disorder in society. And he also frequently attacked Western civilization, which is why leftists today still do that. Now, this is quite important because to say that poverty is the root cause of all social decay is not strictly speaking true. Because we know that crime, for example, which leads inevitably to social decay, may not be a result of poverty in and of itself alone, but in point of fact, it may have many genetic causes, many natural causes, also cultural causes, right? Rather than poverty being the thing that causes that. And how do we know this? For example, if you look at impoverished societies, any cities where there is mass poverty, but there is no crime, that totally blows that theory out of the water. And there are also societies where there's a high prevalence of crime and yet there's very little poverty. This happens too. It is a very, very peculiar sort of phenomenon. So Fourier was being overly simplistic in that. But it wasn't through naivety, it was purposeful on his part. Fourier is also the father of feminism. Okay? He believed that marriage and the family units were dynamics that needed to be opposed because they were in contradiction to socialist principles, basically. And Fourier's primary concern was the liberation of every man, woman, and child, sexually speaking. Okay? And you can read this in his own works, which is why I'm talking about this. And he felt that this could be done through a socialized state education system, which is why we have a socialized state education system today. They are following in the footsteps of Fourier, the current modern-day socialists. He also wrote extensively on the New World Order, which was to be established, which would be a socialist communist order. Okay? And again, you can read this in his own words, in his own works. This is not hidden from anyone. It's just that people haven't taken the time to know about this, because they've been indoctrinated in school systems with the crazy, batshit idea that socialism only began in the 20th century. I don't know who created this myth, this lie, but it's plainly and bluntly not true. Now, Fourier also happened to be a little bit nuts, if that wasn't already apparent, by the way, because he believed that the seas would lose their salinity and would one day turn into lemonade. I am not joking. Okay, this man was Looney Tunes. And this is the man who is the father of socialism, of modern-day leftism. And he created the foundations, of course, of socialism and communism, as we say. But he himself, in creating these concepts, was very heavily influenced by what we could loosely term as the postmodernist revolution, which happened in France as well. And the primary creator of that was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And Rousseau was a proponent of the blank slate theory, of course, and he, in turn, influenced not only Fourier, but also Herbert Marcuse. And Marcuse went on to become a member of the Frankfurt School, which started the charge of cultural Marxism, the invasion of the institutions, right? The long march through the institutions, as they called it, in order to indoctrinate people in academia, in politics, in legislature. So this happened, but Fourier also inspired another gentleman. So this was a multiple attack on multiple fronts by multiple people that Fourier basically, we use the term inspired, but really radicalized would be a proper and appropriate word in today's age, right? And he radicalized Francois Babeuf. Now, a lot of people aren't familiar with who Francois Babeuf is, but Babeuf in 1848, during the French Revolution, began his rise to real power, which that journey for him had started after the execution of Maximilien Robespierre. And he continued to champion the reign of terror politicians, right, like Robespierre. Babeuf was also an occultist, which may come as no surprise to those of you who understand the underpinnings of socialism again, right? He was also a member of the Jacobin Club, which was the most powerful and the most influential political club during the French Revolution. And Babeuf happened to inspire two other gentlemen in turn. It was basically like a gigantic terror network, I'm not joking, which is why it was termed the Reign of Terror when Robespierre tried to implement many of his ideals. But he inspired two gentlemen by the name of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, right? And they took Babeuf's ideas, they took Fourier's ideas especially, and further fleshed these out. And they started focusing and centering in on Babeuf's idea of violent revolution to overthrow the existing political order, in favor of what they called the New World Order. Okay? This is where Soviet communism came from. You can look up all these works that were written by all these gentlemen. You can read the works that I've referenced, and you will see what I'm saying is plainly and absolutely true. Now, another man that was in the mix with all of this was a chap called Alphonse Louis Constant, who later changed his name to Eliphas Lévy. Okay? And he was another occultist in France. He was a French occultist and a prominent socialist. Right? Are you starting to see the pattern here? Right? These occultists, these dark occultists, which is fundamentally what they were, started to conspire and created the ultimate form of control, which was socialism or communism. Socialism being seen as a softer version of communism, despite the fact that it has led to just as many deaths, as can plainly be seen, by the way, in Venezuela presently. But during the 1840s, Constant, or Lévy, as he started calling himself, developed close ties to Fourier's movement, and he began his campaign for state-sponsored socialism, and furthered the cause for a new world order, right? And Lévy, aka Constant, was the first to develop. This is a key central point. Lévy was the first guy who came up with the idea of the Baphomet being represented by a goat, or the man-goat. You know that famous satanic symbol? That came from Lévy's work. And so, this representation led to the birth later on, further down the line, of Satanism. Okay, we're talking about left-hand path Luciferianism, which is slightly different in its beliefs because it's actually theological, and its common brother, shall we say, Satanism proper, if you will, which was set up by Anton LaVey. And LaVey, of course, was the son of Ukrainian immigrants, and they brought with them many of the socialist ideals. And obviously, because socialism had inspired the counterculture in America in the 60s, this led Anton LaVey to form the Church of Satan, which is but one organization in Satanism, by the way. And it's not Satanism proper in real terms, right? It's not true Luciferianism, even though Anton LaVey himself did acknowledge the fact that Satanism was a dogmatic theological religion. Okay? I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm not making a moral value judgment about it, right? And this is a key and important point for a lot of people to understand. I'm not judging Satanism in terms of its moral core or values. I'm saying Satanism is inextricably linked with socialism, right? Just as the dark occult as a whole is inextricably linked with socialism and communism, right? Now, a lot of people, again, because they don't understand these basic facts that are verifiable, provable, I could shower them with information and still they would deny this. Still they would deny this, right? Because they've been so heavily indoctrinated. And those are not the people that this video is meant for. Okay? Because they're beyond saving in any sense. They're beyond educating in any way, shape, or form. They are not worth my time. And if you're watching this and are learning from it, they're not worth your time either. Okay? So there's no point, in real terms, of trying to educate people who are not capable of understanding these things, or just don't want to because the truth is too uncomfortable to go and look these things up. Okay? But yes, as I say, Eliphas Levi, or Alphonse Constant, was the father of the left-hand path in a great many ways. He wrote many of the definitive works, such as Dogma and Ritual, which I have a copy of, by the way. I've read all the mainstay occult books. In fact, I have an entire library of occult books. So I understand what I'm talking about here, right? Now, if you fast forward from the 19th century, right, with all of this stuff going on with all these people, the French Revolution and so on, if you fast forward from that into the 20th century and then into present day times, the 21st century, after all of the stuff that we talked about happened, we got the rise of Hitler in the 19th century, which was inspired by Alice Bailey in the Theosophical Society, who was championing the concept of eugenics. Okay? And you had people like Marie Stopes, who became central key figures in the women's movement, who were also ardent eugenicists. Okay? But these occult groups, there's no getting away from the fact that these dark occultist groups inspired the worst people, the very worst people ever in history. Okay, mass murders were committed because of these people. As I say, Alice Bailey's eugenics concepts inspired Hitler. I think it was called The Seven Rays, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a long time since I've read her work. And I'll have to double check that. I might be wrong on that, and feel free to correct me on that, by the way. But we do know that Alice Bailey's works did inspire Hitler to go on a mass extermination campaign. Similarly, the Theosophical Society had a great deal to do with the fact that the Russian communist movement ended up becoming more murderous as time went on. Okay? So, as I say, you'll find that these dark occult societies that are in existence and were in existence previously also happen to be, in present times, the most powerful organizations, corporations, and governments in the world. Okay, they seem to be at the heart of all of those. And that's no accident, by the way. It is part of the reason why they display their symbolism. If you've studied symbolisms and signs and sigils, you'll understand that they do this frequently. Every major corporation, by the way, that's out there, any multinational corporation, right? Every single one of them uses symbolism and marks and signs that are occult in nature. They're sigils, and they can be traced straight back to certain occult works. And that's no laughing matter, by the way, right? It's just a lot of people don't understand this. Some of those symbols are very positive, and the people that use the positive symbols aren't dark occultists. But there are dark occult symbolisms. There are dark occult associations with colours, for example, that are frequently used. Now, I spoke slightly about this because people weren't ready back then. I've been giving information to people in increments on many, many things. But the fact of the matter is that the Antifa colours, for example, the colours that Antifa use, who are part of the black bloc communist, anarcho-communist type belief system, and it is a belief system. It's all based on ideology, by the way. None of it is based on logic or rationality, as they falsely claim. See, real rational and logical people don't need those ideological lunacies, right? But all of socialism basically is a religion. It's a diseased religion, but it is a religion, right? And it stems from occultism, which also happens to be based in ideology and belief systems. So it's no accident. But Antifa use red and black, that particular symbolism. Okay? And the reason for that, again, goes back to the association with Saturn and Mars in astrological terms. It's astrotheological, that association. And their symbols, the hammer and the sickle. There's a reason why they use that. People think that's to do with the workers uniting. No. I'm not going to tell you right now what that means, but you can go and look that up for yourself and find out what the origins were. What it actually stands for. Where that symbol comes from. But we've got these societies today that are socialist and nobody knows they're socialist. Right? Like, for example, these secret societies. Or these think tanks, as they're known in modern times. That's another one they like to use. They like to call themselves think tanks. Okay? Most think tanks which exist today are actually occult societies. And we'll get to why that is later on. But for example, we have the Fabian Society, which is responsible for the creation of and maintenance of and policy formation of the Labour government or the Labour Party in the UK. And when I refer to the Labour government, I'm talking about the previous government we had to the Conservatives. That was a Labour government. The New Labour, as it was termed, which was really just the same Labour, but people for some reason think that was different from old Labour, and New Labour is somehow different from New Labour. It's all very confusing and very weird, but fundamentally the important point is, right, and they make it confusing for people for a reason, to razzle-dazzle them and confuse them, right? But the main point here is that the Fabian Society basically gives a lot of input, and they publicly admit this, they give a lot of input into Labour Party policy. It just so happens that they also offer input to the current Conservative government, the Conservative Party, as well. And that's no accident. Okay? So there are these kind of societies, like the Fabian Society, like the Club of Rome, and many of these other various organizations, they do exist and they do serve a purpose, right? Not to sound paranoid about it, but what I'm talking about can be factually verified here, right? The other thing is, and this is probably the most important thing I'm going to tell you in this video, and again, please do not share this information with people who aren't ready for it, right? If they're happy living in their political paradigms, let them continue to live in their political paradigms. Don't shatter their illusions, because they will turn rabid. Okay, people who need leftist dogma, dogmatic concepts, principles, axioms, people who need those, right? And trying to take their beliefs away from them makes them react very violently. Just like you see with religious people, by the way. But anyway, so the most powerful secret society of all, and I don't know why they call them secret societies since everybody seems to pretty much know about them, right? I guess it's because membership and admittance to those societies is all very cloak and dagger, and there's all this slapping on bottoms and, the strange rituals that they go through, their initiation ceremonies. But let's forget about that for a second, right? Because the society I'm going to talk about now and mention is the only society that doesn't have initiation rituals. Because you're born into it. And it is the most powerful society out of them all, and you have never heard of it. This is an actual secret society. Okay? And this society is called the Circle of the Black Sun. If you understand the ideas behind the mystery religions, okay, which came from the Babylonian region, Mesopotamia, ancient Mesopotamia, and if you understand the current variations of those in the Hermetic traditions, and you also understand the other incarnations in the Kabbalah and so forth, well, you'll understand what we're talking about here. Okay? The circle of the black sun. The black sun is the antithesis of the actual sun, right? And the actual sun represents the way in which reality exists. Okay? And there's a Sephiroth associated with that, by the way. If you want to get a good grasp of these concepts, you should go and watch my video on the occult specifically, which I uploaded here some time ago. You should be able to find it through the search function. I broke down the Economist cover in that video, and I think you'll find that very useful for understanding what we're talking about here. But the Circle of the Black Sun inverts that in the Qlipothic realm, okay? According to Kabbalistic tradition, the Kabbalah, there's a dark side to occultism as well, i.e. the philosophies, the underpinnings which make a human being excel. Well, you can also destroy a human being, you can degrade the human being, and that is done through a process of indoctrinating them with these false philosophies, these self-destructive philosophies, which lead to this Qlipothic realm, right? And that is, it's a way of telling a story, basically, about the human journey, okay? And the black sun represents self-destruction, self-annihilation, in real terms, right? And the 13 members, because there are only 13 members of this society, nobody's ever mentioned the society. As far as people are concerned, it does not exist, right? Right now, everyone is so focused on organizations like the Trilateral Commission or the, what's that other one, the Bilderberg meetings that happen. Everyone's so focused on those. And they think wrongly, okay? Wrongly, they believe that these meetings, these societies are where the real decisions are being made. That's not true. That's a lie. It's smoke and mirrors this sand being thrown in your eyes so that you don't see what the truth is, what the reality of it is. Okay? And the reality is that this circle of the black sun, the members within that are the people that control this world. Now, this might sound ludicrous again to the people who have not really looked at this properly, right? But the circle of the black sun is basically the end result of these socialist societies, these occultist societies, over time. They were the final incarnation of it. Okay, I'm sure they'll evolve and morph into something else once their members die, right? You'll have a brand new society of some sort in 100, 200 years, which continues on from where they left off. But in the present time, they're the real big cheeses, right? It's the most secret, the most elite society which exists. How this particular society works, and a lot of people won't know this, right? How this works is that you have 9 members of this society that sit on something called the Council of 9. Okay? And the Council of 9 are subservient, if you will, to the will of the triumvirate, which, as the name implies, consists of 3 high-ranking members. Okay? And the triumvirate, in turn, bows to the will of the high priest, thus making 13 members. It's like a chamber inside a chamber inside a chamber, or more appropriately, perhaps, you could think of it as a pyramid, right? So this is one of the reasons, again, why people use this idea very frequently of the pyramids, right? The pyramidic structure is one way of amassing vast amounts of power at the top of that pyramid, whilst depriving everybody else of their power in the bricks down below. And the further down you go, the less power you have, until you reach the base level, which is basically where most of humanity is right now, right at the bottom of that layer. That layer cake, right? It's right at the bottom of it. But these are the people that created and run the present day system in which you live. Okay, this is very important to understand. The debt-based economy, these people came up with the idea. Right? And how it functions is that they are basically the system, the machine on earth, right? They are a master mind. One singular collective hive mind. And the more people they ensnare into that machine, okay, the more people give them power. This is the thing of it. But you wouldn't know that these are the most powerful people on earth if you were to meet them. This is the interesting thing, right? Because they look as ordinary as you or me. Okay? There's a lot of this nonsense about. And it's very hard to really tackle the dogmatic and the religious, particularly people that are conspiracy theorists. What I'm talking about is not conspiracy, and it's not a theory. Okay? These are historical facts that I'm speaking about. Right? And what happens is, if you tell people about these things, who are conspiracy theorists even, they get incensed about it. Because they want to believe in lizard men from Mars, or God knows what else, and hoodoo, voodoo type crazy things, right? I mean, I don't know how else to put it. These people are just as Looney Tunes as the politically inclined socialist movements that exist, right? They're just nuts, quite frankly, right? But they have ended up that way because there are certain people inside what is dubbed the truth movement, right, who are, how can I put this? They're there to subvert it. They have the same paymasters as, for example, the people in politics. Okay? Or the people that are in CNN or the BBC, right? Or all these various organizations that are institutionally designed to hypnotize people, to make them believe falsehoods, right? To coerce people, to persuade people, to use persuasion systems on them. That's what you're basically talking about. Those same people that are that are influenced by those things. Well, if you're not influenced by those things, something else will get you, and that something else is conspiracy theories, right? That's part of the problem with conspiracy theories. And it's the reason why they were designed and created. You could call it controlled opposition if you like. Okay, but that's fundamentally what it is. But these people that we're talking about in the Circle of the Black Sun, this secret society, you wouldn't know them, as I say, from Adam. You literally wouldn't. You'd think they're the most normal people on earth. Okay? But that's not the case. They are highly intelligent. They are superior in intelligence to just about everyone else around. And I'm not kidding about that. Okay, I'm deadly serious. These are very, very clever people. You would be making a mistake to think that these people who rule the world today are just as batshit nuts as the people that created socialism. No. The people who rule the world today aren't suffering from insanity. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, these people are hyper-sane. They are hyper-sane. They have thought things through to the nth degree. Okay, they've looked at everything so intently that they know what the end result is going to be before anything is even done. That's the kind of people you're really fundamentally dealing with here. And they're so clever that you're living in their system. They're not living in yours. You're living in theirs. You were born into bondage. You were born into slavery. That's what people don't know. Right? That they were born being slaves. There's no way, there's no path other than self-actualization to free yourself from that. Okay? Knowledge, understanding, wisdom, empathy, the path of mildness, taking that will free you from their control. But most people do not have the willpower to do that. You see? For example, people think that they need to be in debt to survive. Everyone's in debt up to their eyeballs today. Who's free of it? Not a single person. Because the same people that instituted regime change and revolution in what became Soviet Communist Russia did the same thing in America with the creation of the Federal Reserve. They took over the government's State Department with people like Alger Hiss. I've spoken about all of this before, right? And if you haven't checked out those works that I've put up here on these matters, shame on you. Okay? But these are the people that they put in place, people like Hiss, people like all these various people in the IMF, people who create the person who created the IMF fundamentally, and the UN, the United Nations. Okay? You're living under their system and you don't know it. You're working a job that was created by them, most likely, in this corporatized, globalized system. If you're working a government job, well, you're already under the thumb of the state, right? There's no way for you to win. That's the big secret. People can't win if they are still inside the system and they think they're free. Okay? If you think you can use the system to free yourself, you're just as Looney Tunes as all the other people that are on this earth that submit themselves to this dark occult philosophy, this dark occult ideology. Okay? And I'm deadly serious about that. You can't free yourself in that way from anything. You can't use the system to do it. You can't change the system from within, as a lot of people think they can do, because the system will just corrupt you and break you and leave you on the garbage heap. That's what it's there to do, right? They don't think about it like this. It's like an ant colony, right? You don't need every single worker ant alive in that system. You don't need every single worker ant to be thinking beyond its station. You merely need it to perform as well as it does. Okay? But see these people that we're talking about, this Circle of the Black Sun, the Council of Nine, the Triumvirate, the High Priest, they have no money, right? They're not rich, which is why you never hear about them. Okay? Think about it. If you invented funny money, right, which is what the Federal Reserve System basically is, right? It's fiat currency, debt-based currency, which accrues debt every time it's printed. So how can it possibly be real, right? If you create that, you're creating monopoly money. Right? The Bank of England does it, the Federal Reserve does it, right? It's not backed by anything. After currency was taken off the gold standard, it wasn't backed by anything. And before even the gold standard kicked in, it still wasn't really backed by anything. It was just backed by paper gold. And that doesn't really count for anything, if you understand the reality of what the hell happened with the gold that was owned by originally wealthy countries, right? So it's funny money. Why would you want that funny money if you invented it? Okay? And the reason they're not rich is because they have access to money whenever they need it. They just print it out for themselves if they need it at that time. Right? That's the kind of people that you're dealing with here. And so they have no use for money. They don't want to get particularly over wealthy. They don't want to be millionaires or billionaires or trillionaires. They're quite happy to sink countries with trillions of dollars of debt. It's a power trip, right? It's a power trip. And power is a very, very strong incentive for people who believe in hierarchical systems. And they're not political. At least not in the sense that we would understand it. I.e., I don't mean that they don't influence politics. They absolutely do, right? But what I'm saying is that they're not biased in their political worldviews because, again, they created the dichotomy, right? So why would they be biased in it? Think about that for a second. Why would they be biased? If you create the left and the right, if you invent this paradigm, or your predecessors do in these previous forms of socialism that we were talking about, right? If you invent that, or you subvert the right, and or you move the Overton window, right, or you move the pendulum to the far left, then why on earth would you bother taking sides? You wouldn't, right? You absolutely wouldn't. They don't get political in that sense. They don't take political sides. They never have. The only thing they do look at, which is why you see in the world, by the way, it doesn't matter who the leader is, it doesn't matter who the party is, the agenda is always the same. It keeps going. The agenda is always the same. Why is that? Right? So, it keeps going. That agenda, which is implemented by them. And what do? Well, they don't get political. They watch people, let me tell you the absolute truth about this, they watch people getting into political disputes and they are laughing their asses off. They are laughing their asses off. Okay? They sit back and laugh at humanity, at its stupidity. Okay? And one of the problems with these guys is that you can't fault them for that in a real sense. These dark occultists, right? These, if you want to call them Satanists, fine, but they're not technically Satanists as in the Church of Satan as people understand today, right? They are satanic in nature. But not in... Okay, that's another point I need to... I just realized I haven't addressed that, and this is already a very long video, but I guess I need to get to that, right? Look, Satanism is not the worship of some guy called Satan, okay? The imagery and depictions of Satan evolved over time to a point where Satanists actually created much of the imagery that was supposed to be associated with Satan, right? Satan comes from the ancient Hebrew, right? Ha-Satan, which means the adversary. Okay? It's about being adversarial. Adversarial to what? To humanity. To human goodness. Right? The reason they are that way, the reason the socialists and the communists and everyone else who subscribes to the satanic ideology, right, if we want to call it that, or the dark occultist ideology, is because it's nihilistic. Okay? And they are nihilists themselves, i.e., they don't believe there's any point to human life. So instead of human life ending billions of years in the future, why not just end some of it now? Hence the mass murders, right? Anyway, getting back on track. So Satan is an invention, a creation, a way. Satan as we understand him today, right, is a pictorial representation of the manifestation of the absolute evil which exists on this earth. Fundamentally, that's what it is. There is no real devil, right? There never was. But this idea serves two purposes, right? The first being that it creates fear in people, it instills fear so that they never want to learn about occultism or Satanism. If you put scary imagery everywhere, right, and you frighten people away so that they never examine your actual philosophies and your beliefs, well, that's a very clever way of keeping people away from the door. It's a clever way of keeping people's eyes closed. Okay? It's a very clever way of doing that. And simultaneously, it also makes people fearful of them. Okay? That's the thing. And then they laugh at human stupidity. Right? They laugh at the stupidity of human beings. When you get these religious individuals, right? Because they invented all the major religions, by the way. Okay? Islam, Christianity, and Judaism in their current incarnations, and I stress in their current incarnations, right? Because on this channel, I have gone into great depth explaining the origins of each of these. And again, if you haven't learned or you haven't paid attention, then shame on you. Okay? All the major world religions, in their current incarnations, were created by these people. Right? But the religious types, they start getting bent out of shape when you talk about Satanism. Right? And they start invoking all kinds of strange, mythological, superstitious beliefs. Right? Like, oh no, the demons, right? And so what happens is, the real heavy-duty occultists look at that and they laugh. People like me laugh at that. And I'm on the side of humanity. But people like me even laugh at that. And do you know why? Because it displays absolute ignorance. The information's there if you want to learn about a lot of this stuff. People just don't want to. If they did, they would know. Okay? But that's the thing of it, right? So for these people, they have no interest in money. They have no interest in taking political sides. They have no interest in fame or fortune at all, right? Because they control who becomes famous and who doesn't. This is another thing. Think about it, how do you make someone famous? Well, you give them airtime through these mediums that we have, the media, right? So television, okay, radio, in the old days, right? These two were the main two mediums. Written newspapers, right, and magazines, right? And then today we've got the internet. And guess what? They just so happen to control all of these mediums, every single one of them. It's no accident that every single mainstream media corporation is owned by only 6 corporations, and they in turn are owned by these dark occultists. And they don't pay money to own them, by the way. Now the thing is, what I'm saying here is probably terrifying the absolute crap out of them. They're going to get bent out of shape about this particular video. That I know. Okay? But they're not going to worry about it too much. And here's why. So, if you consider how many people are going to learn from this at all, if they do at all, or if they take on board what I've said and go and research these things for themselves to verify, because that's very important. Never, ever, ever take anyone's word for anything. Always go and look it up. Always. Do your own research. It's very important. Okay? Because the moment you start placing faith in people, especially people who you don't know personally, in whom you can't invest trust in a total sense, you shouldn't do that, right? You should hear what they say and then apply your own critical thinking to it, right? And go and look up. If what they've said is true, then it'll be self-evident. If it's not, then it won't be, right? So, as I say, they're not going to get too bent out of shape about this. And the reason for that is because most people are just plumb ignorant. And when I talk about most people, think about how many human beings there are on this earth. 7.2 billion almost, right? Of those 7.2 billion, who cares about what is really going on this earth? Are they even aware of it? Most of them aren't even aware of world events. They've chosen lives of ignorance. Okay, this is part of the way in which these dark occultists actually absolve themselves of their actions, right? Is by using that as an excuse to do what they do. They say, well, you know, they're all ignorant anyway. They're just cattle. Okay? If they want to be like sheep, then we'll just guide them to the slaughterhouse, and that's okay. Because they wanted to go there. They chose to go there. Okay, again, I'm not making a value judgment on that. They might actually be right about that, because if people are ignorant, if people want ignorance and they enjoy ignorance, why should you wake them up? If they want to be, like, it's a little bit like this Islamization of Europe, for example, right? I'm just using this as an example, because I've talked at length about a lot of things through this. But if you take a look at that whole situation, or what's happening in Sweden right now, which is an apt and brilliant example of this, if people want to capitulate and they want to submit to murderous people with murderous ideas, right, destructive ideas, you can't really stop them from doing that. Right? Morally speaking, the onus is upon people like myself and other people that are moral, like yourselves, to speak out about these things, right? And to educate people as best we can, right? Those who can be educated. But for the bulk of humanity, they cannot be educated. That is the great problem. They revel in their ignorance. Okay? They continue to get deeper and deeper into personal debt, into national debt, and they don't care. Okay? They're easily swayed by propaganda. If someone tells them that they should get a mortgage to buy a house, they'll get a mortgage to buy a house, not realizing that they don't own that house. And even if, when the mortgage gets paid off, guess what? You still don't technically own that house. There's a lot to that. I don't want to go into that too much, right? That's to do with property rights and law. But in a great many ways, technically speaking, the land that exists within the borders of a country belongs to the country itself, under this socialist doctrine which has been implemented in most countries, right? And therefore anything on that land and in that land actually belongs to the state. Now, that may vary slightly from country to country. And I'm not saying it's the case right across the board, right? But there are similar kind of things to get somebody hooked on this or that, right? To get people deeper into debts, to get people more and more enslaved and chained to the system, and not just them, but their children and their children's children, to get them to agree to and accede to wars in foreign countries that they have no business getting involved in. A great example of this was the Iraq War. Over 90% of the American public supported the Iraq War. Yes, that's because of media propaganda, but look how stupid they were. They were too stupid to see through media propaganda. They believed the lie of weapons of mass destruction. They continue to believe lies to this day, even though just recently CNN has been exposed several times for being absolutely full of nothing more than propaganda. False news stories fabricated out of thin air. And I'm just using CNN as one example of this, right? But you see what I'm saying here, hopefully, right? You see what I'm getting at. You can't change the ignorance of people, and this is part of the reason why the occultists use this as a get-out clause. These dark occultists. And again, they may well be right about that. They may have a sound basis for saying that. And you can only educate the people who are able to be educated, who are capable of listening and understanding. Everyone else, you can't do anything for them. Okay? You just can't. If people willingly want to die, there's not much you can do. So that's why I guess with this video, that's why they're not worried about it, because they know that nobody really is going to pay attention to it. Okay? The few of you that do, well done. Right? The few of you that have stuck through this for an hour and sat through this, congratulations. Right? You're increasing your knowledge base, or you're trying in your own ways to do what's necessary, right? To break out of this mental enslavement, this physical enslavement, this dead enslavement that we all find ourselves in. When we're born, we all find ourselves in that, you know? And it's a constant battle to get out of it. Get out of the mindset that they try and impose on you. It's a psychological state, really. There's a lot of psychological work you need to start doing on yourself in order to be able to really effectively combat the system. Because again, they are the system. This is the system. This is an occultocracy. And there is no denying that. People can keep trying to deny that. You know, these people that exist in the skeptic community, I have a lot of respect for them when they tackle particular subjects, right? But they have a blind spot. They do not understand, like everyone else, they do not understand that the origins of most of the things that we're seeing today are of a dark nature. Okay? There's a very, very sinister element to the powers that control the world. Anyway, I'll leave it there for this video because it's been a very long video, and part of it, I have to admit, part of it was me just sort of ranting here, right? But I've got another appointment that I have to attend, I have to go to, as you can see, which is why I'm dressed as I am. It's a prior engagement. But thank you very much for watching this video. Take good care of yourselves, and God bless you.